Danny talks about stuff. And again, I'm just trying to get into the rhythm of going quickly. So now today we're on American Government Chapter 7, Voting in Elections. There's definitely a little more meat and potatoes to this chapter than the last chapter, Chapter 6. So, I think actually my face might disappear on this one because I'm going to read a lot of this stuff. So you know where I'm at. But I'm sure everyone's tired of my illustrious face. So here we go, voting in elections, right? So a key step in order to vote is that citizens must register to do so, which again has become contentious in recent times. However, the process to register varies from state to state. So that's another thing with regard to, say, federalism. If you don't know what federalism is, go back, learn what it is. But that's why it varies, federalism. Different states have different rights and laws and regulations. The reason this registration process varies goes back to our readings. Sometimes I just forget how smart I am and get ahead of myself. We can attribute much of the voting and registration variance to the political culture of an area, right? So different areas of the country have different issues to deal with. Some live near the sea. Some have wolves. Some have bears. Some have a lot of people. Some have not a lot of people, right? So these are all going to affect the values with which those places live by and then vote by. This, in turn, is very much the result of demographics of a particular state. Having a strong grasp on the last chapter, Chapter 6, public opinion, will aid significantly in our understanding of this chapter. Right, so then not surprisingly, who may get registered and how is this accomplished is a controversial political concern. Right? It is important to keep in mind discussions of disenfranchisement we have already addressed, such as poll taxes and literacy tests, when reading Chapter 7. And if you haven't read that and don't know what that's from, that's going to be from Chapter 5 with regards to civil rights. So make sure you know what a disenfranchisement means. It means making it difficult or ex post facto making it difficult to vote for people. And what are some strategies in doing that? Poll taxes, making people pay money to vote, and literacy tests, taking a test about being able to read or write to vote. Just because you do happen to be illiterate, you still have the right to vote, if that makes sense. One voting registration issue that has emerged in recent years has been to what extent should states allow convicted felons to vote? So different states have different policies with that. You guys can double check me. I think it's Maine that says you can actually vote if you're in prison, even if you had a felony. So every state's different in that regard. So a lot of this kind of stuff came from this court case that we should know, Shelby County versus Holder. So Eric Holder was the Attorney General for Barack Obama. This court decision turned back the policy achievements of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, again from Chapter 5. This decision gave discretion over many voting concerns like registration and voter ID laws back to the states and local government, right? So states can make these decisions with regards to, I don't know if you heard the police sirens or not. It's not me. They're not looking for me. Such developments are important because the manner in which people register to vote directly affects the numbers of people that turn out, right? So if you have to get registered to vote, the more people you get registered, the more likely they are to vote because they can actually do so. And so one of these kind of issues is like, well, should you have voter ID? Again, I think our politics will talk about if you're on the right, preventing fraud, and if you're on the left, you want to avoid the disenfranchisement of, say, poor people who also then tend to often disproportionately, although that sounds like minorities, it just means most minorities are not poor, if that makes sense. We have to be careful about the way we speak, but that's the concern that Democrats tend to bring up. But again, it gets turned into this kind of moral issue, which I don't think is fair. I think just whether people can vote or not is important. And if I go and buy a Snickers bar from the 7-Eleven, I have to show ID if I use my debit card. So it does not seem to me immoral or unreasonable to have to show your ID. But that doesn't change the fact that the greater good might be by having no voter ID. So again, this is one of those issues I hope you guys don't get super passionate about because it doesn't make sense to. But if you do and you can convince me, the more power to you. So then the book talks about then how do people get registered to vote? Well, in all states except North Dakota, people must complete a voting application. Some states have residency requirements as well. In 1993, the National Voter Registration Act required that all citizens be able to register to vote when they sign up for their driver's license and Social Security benefits. So yeah, if you go to the DMV, if you get a license, they're going to give you the option to register to vote. My brother had to do that. He thought he had to register. You don't have to register. It might put you through the paces on the DMV website, but you should have the way of clicking out of it. And if you don't, you should call the DMV and go, I don't want to register to vote for whatever reason, and let me have my license. To be able to vote in the U.S., well, you have to be a citizen. That goes without saying. a resident of the voting area and be 18 years of age. Many states have additional requirements. These may include being mentally fit or not currently serving jail time. Again, that's going to differ from place to place. From page 284 in the reading, we can actually predict with strong accuracy who is likely to vote each year based on identified influence factors such as age, education, and income. Campaigns will often target each group of voters in different ways, spending precious campaign money and resources for them to show up at the polls rather than trying to persuade unlikely people who are going to vote. So voter lower turnout is a concern for both the political and cultural elites. Should we be worried about lower voter turnout? Why or why not? So I have a person in the other class who is very active politically, and I told them I don't vote, and then he gave me the riot act and was like, well, it's your civic duty. And I don't know. I don't know if you live in a liberal, democratic republic where we have a constitution that has all these great protections and civil liberties from Chapter 4, that voting is really as important as we think it is. When you live in a place like California, because it's so left-leaning, a lot of these things are going to just be, you're going to win regardless of how you vote. Definitely the vote for president I don't think matters too much here. It's going to be the Democratic person, and it's been like that for the last several years. But it hasn't always been the case. We've had Republican governors and we voted for Republican presidents in the past. So I don't know. And that's a class question. Should we be worried about lower voter turnout? Political scientists, other faculty on the campus they're probably doing voting stuff. They said they were going to have these kind of boards for voting and talking about it. I'm not convinced. I don't think it's as important. Only on issues that are close, that need people to vote, that maybe have moral kind of implications. But, I'm not the biggest pro-voter. I think we want more people who are going to be informed and care about voting. We don't want people who don't necessarily know the issues voting. And I'm one of those people who just doesn't know a lot of the issues, so I'm not that smart. So that's my view on it. A little controversial, especially for someone who's getting their PhD in political science. So what factors drive out turnout? So campaigns themselves by targeting people, age, and other factors like education, race, and gender. And so one of the things that we would contemplate, especially with your guys' area and the snowbirds, is, why is it that older people tend to vote and younger people don't? Really the answer is when you're younger, you're working, you may have a young family, young kids that take up a lot of your time. You don't care, you're partying, you're going to go to the beach, you're going to go to these pool parties that Palm Springs has that I never get invited to. I want to be invited to one of these pool parties, someone invite me. But yeah, and so when you're older, you're retired, your kids are probably out of the house, you have a lot of time to just complain about stuff. Some of us might be older and don't find that funny. But yeah, that seems to me to be the case, right? That has to do with it's not because younger people are less conscientious than older people. It has to do with essentially time. Another typo, should we say 25? What factors decrease turnout? Participation is not mandated. So in countries like Australia and Brazil, you face a penalty like with jury duty here if you don't go vote. You pay a fine. Polls open on election day only, right? So there's less time to vote. So if you're busy, you can't make it. Showing ID at the polls we already talked about. And then voter apathy, which I guess I would fall in this kind of category. I'm very apathetic. I don't care. I don't care about this stuff. Let's see. Considering factors that influence people that decide to run for political office. So again, this becomes another issue with regards to elections. It's not just people getting out to vote. It's who is going to go run for office? What are the kinds of people? And this is generally a pretty good feminist argument that, historically women have been disadvantaged when running for office. Because for whatever reason, whether it's biological or cultural or psychological, right, women still, to this day, do the majority of the child rearing, child raising. So it puts a lot of time in your life, especially when you're young and have the energy, where you can't really run for office because you're taking care of a family. That obviously can be true of men, but it still disproportionately impacts women. So this is something you'll hear, especially women and feminists talk about, maybe changing when school is, like primary school, making it easier. I think they talked about, Kamala Harris was having paid childcare. That would be something the government would pay for you to have childcare or something like that. Other factors that impact this is the actual political seat open. So there's this thing called the incumbent, the person who holds the office already, and the incumbency effect. People tend to vote for incumbents. You have an advantage if you've been in office. So why is that? Because people know you. You have a track record. So if you have a good track record, people know you're good. So it's not really until there's some kind of controversy or weakness in your positions where someone can run against you. That's where the seat becomes competitive. When an incumbent holds the office but is not in a politically secure position, right? So maybe the person in office had a scandal or they stole some money. You're not going to be in a good position, and then people want to go oh, this guy, this gal, they're not so great. They stole money. I want to vote for a new person. the amount of money the person was able to attain prior to that. Someone wants me to vote for them, so you get this number. I'm not voting for you. I want to do the opposite. I'm going to unvote for you. And then we get into campaign finance laws, and then more key terms. Political action committees, you really want to know. PACs, I'll often reference this. So these are organizations that are affiliated with the actual policy and the actual candidate. So political action committees fall under particular regulations that they have to report the money with which they raise, right? So this is important to note. So they spend and raise money for campaigns for people and policies. 1907, we had the Tillman Act that stopped corporations from contributing money to candidates running for federal office, at least directly to the company. 1971, this is really important, the Federal Election Commission Campaign Act. So this established these kind of rules. And then in 74, the creation of the Federal Election Commission, the organization that enforces the laws, right, from 71 that got passed. So this, again, there are all these FEC regulations that say how much you can only actually donate a certain amount of money to a candidate directly. So then we get Citizens United, which was an interest group, and oftentimes this gets cast as a right-leaning thing of like organizations being counted as people and having free speech, because the case found that the passage of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, which we should all know from 2002, violated corporations' free speech. Again, political propaganda. If it benefits both Republicans and Democrats. How does it benefit Democrats? Because unions are organizations too, and they spend money on candidates, right? So I know this gets kind of couched like, oh, Republicans kind of wanted it, but that's all hype. Both sides wanted it, right? So you had bipartisan leaders. In that 2002, it was Republican John McCain and Democrat from Wisconsin Russ Feingold, who were kind of wanted this kind of more regulated campaign finance laws. But then this organization sued, and it actually benefits pretty much people that want to spend money regardless of party and politics. So that allowed the creation of super PACs, super PACs. So you want to know the difference between a super PAC and a regular PAC for the test, if that's not clear. Like, duh. So the Constitution is silent on how candidates are nominated to run for office. So political parties have arisen, and they're not part of the Constitution, and they have taken up this role. There are primary elections, that's so against Democrat versus Democrat, Republican versus Republican, that are used to decide if a person may run for a position or not. So they'll have it before the main election. Closed primaries mean people that registered to that party can vote. Open primaries mean anyone can vote. So these national conventions are also utilized to formulate the party platform, which has happened. And then what's interesting about this year, which we'll get to this stuff in Chapter 9, the Republicans didn't really have a proper convention where they made a new platform. They're running on the same one from 2016. The Democrats do have a new one, and that's part of our homework that you guys should all see and be reading. Campaign and voting, right? Fundraising is crucial, so money helps. It's an important form of political speech, I suppose. This often reflects a candidate's viability. So the more money a candidate can raise, the more support they're going to get from other types of cultural and media elites and political elites. It means that they can win. This person makes a lot of money, they can win. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. Media coverage, especially of lesser-known candidates, is crucial during elections. They inform and persuade voters with the information they convey. But simply put, media shapes voter public opinion, back to our last chapter. Technology also influences outcomes of election. Much of U.S. history, most significant technology was the printing press, newspapers, and pamphlets. The use of trains and radios. So President Truman went across the country on trains. He was the last president to do that, to spread his message. Obviously, 1960 was the first televised presidential debate, and that showed a big difference, right? So Kennedy ended up winning the election, but if people on the radio heard it, they would have thought, they actually did think that Nixon won the debate. People who saw television thought Kennedy won the debate, so that's kind of interesting. When voters make decisions at the polls, they will often rely on their party ID, like we talked about in the last chapter. So like whatever your party is, regardless of the person running, you'll just vote for your party. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. Man, just a lot here. So hopefully you're getting the gist that I'm just covering these things very quickly, and you need to be reading these chapters and asking me questions. But I'm hoping these videos are helping you in kind of compiling your thoughts and getting prepared for the tests. Make sure you're still taking your own notes. Don't like just print these out or have them open during a test. You want to have essentially a document or a written document, handwritten of a synthesis of all these different notes and important things, right? So you don't want to have all of this to reference. So you'll waste your time trying to pass the test. So I'll see you in the next video. See you guys later.